It was just another quiet Saturday morning at the park, the kind of day that makes you feel alive. The sun was shining bright, casting golden rays through the trees, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of fresh grass. A woman sat under a towering oak tree near the lake, her wheelchair parked neatly beside her. She had been coming to this spot for months now, finding solace in the peaceful surroundings. It wasn't just any ordinary park for her. It was a place where she could escape the weight of her past and simply breathe. This woman was no stranger to hardship. She had served her country with pride, wearing the uniform of someone who dedicated years of their life to protecting others. But the battlefield had left its mark on her, both physically and emotionally. Now, confined to a wheelchair because of injuries sustained during service, she relied on resilience more than ever. Despite everything, she found joy in small things. The chirping birds, the rustling leaves, and even the simple act of sipping coffee from her thermos while watching families play by the water's edge. On this particular morning, however, something felt different. As she settled into her usual spot, she noticed a group of teenagers hanging out nearby. At first glance, they seemed like typical kids, laughing loudly, passing snacks around, and snapping selfies with their phones. Nothing unusual about that. Parks are meant for everyone, after all. But as the minutes ticked by, her instincts started tingling. Something about them didn't sit right. The group began whispering among themselves, glancing over at her every so often. Their eyes lingered longer than necessary, and their smirks grew wider each time they looked her way. She tried to brush it off, telling herself not to overthink things. Maybe they were just being curious, or maybe they weren't even talking about her. But deep down, she knew better. Her gut rarely steered her wrong, especially when it came to reading people. And then it happened. One of them, a tall kid with shaggy hair and a skateboard tucked under his arm, started walking toward her. He stopped a few feet away, leaning casually against his board, his gaze fixed on her wheelchair. "What's wrong with you?" he asked, his voice dripping with mockery. "Can't walk or something?" The question hit her like a punch to the chest. For a moment she froze, unsure how to respond. She'd faced dangerous situations before, but this felt different. This wasn't combat. It was humiliation disguised as curiosity. Before she could say anything, his friends joined him, forming a loose circle around her. They laughed, egging him on, feeding off each other's energy like predators circling their prey. Another one of them stepped forward, kicking the front wheel of her chair hard enough to make it spin slightly. "Bet you can't even defend yourself," he taunted, his tone cruel and dismissive. The laughter grew louder, echoing in her ears. Each word stung more than the last, chipping away at her composure. Yet, despite the rising anger inside her, she forced herself to stay calm. Losing control wouldn't help anyone. She reached for her phone, keeping it low and out of sight as she opened the camera app. Recording the interaction might come in handy later if things escalated further. Meanwhile, the harassment continued. One of the teens grabbed her bag off her lap and tossed it onto the ground, scattering its contents across the dirt path. Pens rolled away, papers fluttered in the wind, and her water bottle bounced awkwardly before coming to rest near a patch of grass. Her heart raced as she realized the situation was spiraling out of control. These weren't harmless pranks anymore. They were crossing lines that shouldn't be crossed. She needed help, and fast. Dialing 911 seemed like the only option, but she also scanned the area for anyone else who might step in. That's when she spotted it, a car parked not too far away, its rear window adorned with a familiar emblem. The Marine Corps logo stared back at her, bold and unmistakable. Hope flickered within her. Whoever owned that car might understand what she was going through. They might know what it means to stand up for someone in need. Summoning every ounce of courage she had left, she wheeled herself closer to the vehicle, scribbled a quick note on a piece of paper, and slipped it under the windshield wiper. "If you're reading this, I need your help. I'm being harassed by a group of teens near the lake. Please assist if you can." With trembling hands, she returned to her spot under the tree, clutching her phone tightly. Every second felt like an eternity as she waited, praying that whoever owned the car would see her plea in time. Little did she know, fate was already setting the stage for an unexpected twist, one that would change the course of her day forever. The note under the windshield wiper fluttered slightly in the breeze, catching the attention of the car's owner as they returned from a quick stroll around the park. The man, tall, broad-shouldered, and wearing a Marine Corps t-shirt, paused, for a moment, his eyes narrowing as he read the urgent message. His expression shifted instantly, the relaxed demeanor giving way to something sharper, more focused. He glanced toward the lake, scanning the area until his gaze landed on the scene unfolding near the oak tree. Without hesitation, he sprang into action. But he didn't go alone. Spotting two other joggers nearby, both veterans he recognized from previous visits to the park, he flagged them down with a wave and a few sharp words. "We've got trouble over there," he said, pointing toward the group of teens surrounding the woman in the wheelchair. "Let's move." The three men exchanged knowing looks. There was no need for lengthy explanations. Their shared background spoke volumes. They knew what it meant to stand up for someone who couldn't defend themselves, especially when that person had already sacrificed so much. Together they moved quickly, their boots crunching against the gravel path as they approached. The commotion. By now the harassment had reached a boiling point. One of the teens was standing uncomfortably close to the woman, leaning down to sneer in her face. Another was rifling through her belongings, tossing items carelessly onto the ground while his friends laughed and cheered him on. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. The woman sat rigid in her wheelchair, gripping her phone tightly, her knuckles white with strain. She looked small, vulnerable, but there was steel in her eyes, a quiet determination that refused to break. When the Marines arrived, the atmosphere shifted immediately. The loud laughter died down, replaced by uneasy silence as the teens turned to see who had interrupted their game. The leader of the trio stepped forward first, his presence commanding and impossible to ignore. Standing well over 6 feet tall, with muscles honed by years of discipline and training, he exuded authority. His voice boomed across the clearing, cutting through the tension like a blade. "What's going on here?" he demanded, his tone leaving no room for excuses or lies. The question hung in the air, heavy and unanswerable. For a moment, none of the teens responded. They shuffled awkwardly, avoiding eye contact, suddenly aware of how outnumbered they were. Their earlier bravado crumbled under the weight of the situation. The woman in the wheelchair finally spoke up, her voice steady despite everything she'd endured. "They've been harassing me," she said simply, gesturing toward the scattered contents of her bag. "They took my things, pushed my chair. I tried to call for help, but they wouldn't stop." Her words struck a chord with the Marines. Each of them had seen enough cruelty in their lives to recognize it when they saw it, and this wasn't just bullying. It was cowardice masked as fun. The leader knelt beside the woman, his posture respectful and reassuring. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice softening as he addressed her directly. She nodded, though her hands still trembled slightly. "Thank you," she whispered, her gratitude evident in every syllable. It was clear she hadn't expected anyone to intervene, let alone a group of strangers willing to step in without hesitation. In that moment, relief washed over her features, replacing the fear and frustration that had dominated her expression just moments before. Meanwhile, the teens began to squirm under the intense scrutiny of the Marines. One of them muttered something, under his breath, trying to play it off as a joke, but the attempt fell flat. The leader shot him a glare that could have frozen fire, silencing him instantly. Then, without another word, the veterans sprang into action. They collected the woman's belongings, carefully gathering papers, pens, and personal items before handing them back to her. As they worked, one of the Marines addressed the harassers directly. "You think this is funny?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. "Messing with someone who can't fight back, that's not strength, that's weakness. Real men don't pick on people weaker than them. They protect them." His words hit home, landing with the force of a hammer. The teens exchanged nervous glances, their bravado completely shattered. Some of them stared at the ground, ashamed, while others fidgeted uncomfortably, unable to meet the Marines' piercing gazes. Whatever confidence they'd felt earlier had evaporated entirely, leaving behind only guilt and regret. While the confrontation unfolded, the sound of sirens grew, louder in the distance. Help was on the way, thanks to the woman's earlier call to 911. Knowing the authorities would soon arrive, the Marines made sure the scene was secure. They kept the teens contained, ensuring none of them tried to flee or cause further trouble. At the same time, they continued to comfort the woman, offering reassurance and support. One of the joggers crouched beside her, speaking softly. "You did the right thing by calling for help," he told her, "and you're stronger than you know for handling this the way you did." His words seemed to lift a weight off her shoulders, bringing a faint smile to her lips. For the first time since the ordeal began, she allowed herself to relax, trusting that these strangers would ensure her safety. When the police officers finally arrived, the Marines provided detailed accounts of what had happened, backing up the woman's story. With unwavering clarity, their testimony carried weight, not only because of their credibility as veterans but also because of the moral authority they commanded. The officers listened intently, taking notes and observing the teens' behavior. It didn't take long for them to decide on a course of action. Within minutes, the harassers were detained, handcuffed, and loaded into patrol cars, their faces pale with shock and embarrassment. Throughout the process, the woman remained calm, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. She thanked the officers and expressed her gratitude to the Marines once again, this time with tears glistening in her eyes. "I don't know what I would have done without you," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for stepping in." The leader smiled warmly, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "That's what we do," he replied simply. "We look out for each other. You're not alone." As the crowd dispersed and the park returned to its usual tranquility, the woman watched the Marines walk away, their figures fading into the distance. Though the encounter had been harrowing, it left her with a renewed sense of hope. She realized that even in moments of darkness, there are always people willing to step forward and make a difference. And sometimes, all it takes is a single act of kindness or courage to turn despair into light. The park slowly returned to its usual rhythm after the chaos had subsided. The wail of sirens faded into the distance, leaving behind only the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chatter of families enjoying their day. But for the woman in the wheelchair, the events of the past hour lingered like a shadow she couldn't quite shake. Though the immediate danger was over, her mind replayed every moment. The taunts, the laughter, the cruel kicks to her chair. It wasn't just the actions that stung. It was the reminder of how vulnerable she had felt, even in a place meant for peace. Still, there was something else lingering too, a flicker of gratitude, a warmth that softened the edges of the pain. She glanced toward the Marines, who were now standing near the edge of the clearing, talking quietly among themselves. They weren't heroes out of some movie or storybook. They were real people, with calloused hands and weathered faces, their t-shirts slightly damp from sweat. Yet, in her eyes, they might as well have been giants. What they did wasn't flashy or dramatic. It was simple, human decency. And sometimes, that's what makes the biggest difference. One of them noticed her looking and gave a small nod, his expression soft but firm. She offered a tentative smile in return, though her lips quivered ever so slightly. There was so much she wanted to say, so many emotions swirling inside her chest. Gratitude, relief, admiration. But words failed her. How do you thank someone for stepping into your darkest moment and turning it around? For reminding you that kindness exists, even when cruelty seems louder? As the police wrapped up their initial investigation, taking statements from witnesses, and loading the teens into patrol cars, the leader of the trio approached her again. This time he didn't kneel or crouch beside her. Instead, he stood at ease, his posture relaxed but attentive. "You're safe now," he said, his voice calm and steady. "But if you need anything else, if you want us to stay until family or friends arrive, we're here." His offer caught her off guard. These men didn't owe her anything. They could have easily walked away after the authorities showed up, leaving her to process everything on her own. But they hadn't. They stayed. Not because they expected recognition or reward, but because it was the right thing to do. That kind of selflessness wasn't common anymore. Or at least, that's what she'd started to believe. Seeing it firsthand made her heart swell with hope. She shook her head gently, managing another shaky smile. "I'll be okay," she replied, though her voice betrayed the uncertainty she still felt. "But thank you, really. I don't think I can say it enough." He nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. "Take care of yourself," he said simply, before turning to rejoin his friends. As they began to walk away, she called out softly, "Wait!" They stopped, turning back to face her. She hesitated for a moment, unsure how to phrase what she wanted to ask. Finally, she blurted it out. Can I get your numbers? Or maybe meet up sometime? I'd like to thank you properly." Her request seemed to surprise them, not because it was unusual, but because it came from such an authentic place. After a brief pause, the leader grinned, pulling out his phone. "Sure thing," he said, handing it to her so she could enter her contact information. His two companions followed suit, each offering their phones with friendly smiles. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to her. In that moment, she realized these men weren't just strangers who happened to help her. They were people she could trust, people who cared. Once the exchange was done, they waved goodbye and disappeared down the path, their figures growing, smaller until they blended into the crowd. She sat there for a while longer, watching the ripples on the lake and letting the weight of everything sink in. Her bag rested securely on her lap, its contents neatly organized thanks to the Marine's efforts. Everything was back where it belonged, except for one thing, her sense of safety. That would take time to rebuild. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, she found herself scrolling through social media. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard as she debated whether to share what had happened. Part of her wanted to keep it private, to tuck the memory away like a fragile keepsake. But another part, a stronger part, felt compelled to speak up. Maybe sharing her story could inspire others to act with courage and compassion. Maybe it could remind people that even in the face of cruelty, there are always those willing to stand up for what's right. With a deep breath, she typed out a post. She kept it honest and straightforward, recounting the events without embellishment. She mentioned the harassment, the fear, and the despair, but she also highlighted the bravery of the Marines who had intervened. She ended the post with a simple message. To anyone reading this, please remember that we all have the power to make a difference. Whether it's helping someone in need or standing up against injustice, our actions matter. Today, 3 strangers reminded me of that. Thank you for restoring my faith in humanity. She hit post and set her phone aside, feeling a mix of nerves and relief. Within minutes, notifications began pouring in. Likes, comments, shares. Friends and acquaintances reached out to check on her, expressing shock and outrage at what she'd endured. Strangers chimed in too, praising the Marines and vowing to pay their good deed forward. Some shared their own stories of being bullied or harassed, finding solace in knowing they weren't alone. Others promised to step in if they ever witnessed similar behavior, inspired by the example set by the veterans. By morning, her post had gone viral, spreading far beyond her immediate circle. Local news outlets picked up the story, interviewing her briefly about the incident. She spoke candidly, not seeking attention but hoping to spark meaningful conversations about respect, accountability, and community support. Her words resonated deeply, especially with other veterans who saw parallels between her experience and their own struggles with visibility and acceptance in civilian life. Meanwhile, the Marines received messages of gratitude from people across the country. When they saw her post, they were humbled, not because they sought recognition, but because they understood the impact of their actions. One of them joked, "We didn't do anything special, we just did what we're supposed to do." But deep down, they knew better. Acts of kindness, no matter how small, ripple outward in ways we can't always predict. In the weeks that followed, The woman and the Marine stayed in touch, forming an unexpected bond. Over coffee and casual conversations, they discovered shared experiences and values. They talked about their time in service, the challenges of transitioning to civilian life, and the importance of supporting one another. Their connection wasn't just based on mutual respect. It was rooted in a shared understanding of sacrifice and resilience. Inspired by their heroism, members of the local community rallied together to organize events aimed at fostering unity and empathy. Anti-bullying workshops were held at schools, emphasizing the importance of treating everyone with dignity and respect. Veterans groups partnered with local organizations to create support networks for individuals facing adversity. Even the park where it all began became a symbol of hope, hosting gatherings and fundraisers dedicated to promoting inclusivity and compassion. For the woman, the experience marked a turning point. While the scars of that day would always remain, they no longer defined her. Instead, they served as a reminder of her strength and of the goodness that exists in the world. Every time she visited the park, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, knowing she wasn't alone. The Marines had shown her that even in moments of darkness, light could shine through, and she vowed to carry that lesson with her, wherever life took her next. The bond between the woman and the Marines grew stronger with each passing week. What started as a chance encounter in the park blossomed into something deeper, a friendship forged not just by shared experiences, but by a mutual understanding of struggle, resilience, and the importance of standing up for others. They began meeting regularly, sometimes at the same park where it all happened, other times at cozy coffee shops or during community events. These gatherings weren't planned out meticulously. They were organic, spontaneous, and filled with laughter, stories, and moments of reflection. One afternoon, as the group sat around a picnic table near the lake, the conversation turned to their time in service. The Marines spoke openly about the challenges they faced during deployment, the sleepless nights, the constant uncertainty, and the weight of responsibility that came with protecting lives. But they also talked about the camaraderie, the unbreakable bonds formed under pressure, and the pride of serving something greater than themselves. Their words painted vivid pictures of both hardship and triumph, leaving the woman nodding along in agreement. She listened intently, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of tea. When it was her turn to share, she hesitated for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "It's funny," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. "When you're in uniform, people look at you differently. You're seen as strong, capable, almost invincible. But when you come home, everything changes. Suddenly, you're vulnerable in ways you never expected." Her admission hung in the air, raw and honest. The Marines exchanged knowing glances, understanding exactly what she meant. One of them leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "That's why we stick together," he said firmly. "No one else gets it. Not really. Civilians try, sure, but they can't fully understand unless they've been there. That's why days like today matter. We remind each other that we're not alone." His words struck a chord with her, resonating deep within her chest. For so long, she had carried the burden of her injuries and struggles silently, convinced that no one could truly comprehend what she was going through. But sitting here now, surrounded by people who had walked similar paths, she felt a sense of belonging she hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about being understood, it was about being accepted, flaws and all. As the weeks went by, their connection inspired more than just personal growth. Word of their story spread throughout the community, sparking conversations about kindness, accountability, and the power of collective action. Local leaders took notice, organizing initiatives aimed at fostering unity and empathy. Schools invited the Marines to speak at assemblies, sharing their experiences and encouraging students to treat others with respect. Community centers hosted workshops focused on conflict resolution and anti-bullying strategies, drawing crowds eager to learn how to make a positive impact. Even the park itself underwent a transformation. Once just a quiet spot for relaxation, it became a hub of activity and inspiration. Volunteers came together to clean up the area, planting flowers and installing benches dedicated to veterans and first responders. A mural was painted on a nearby wall, depicting scenes of courage and compassion, a tribute to the idea that even small acts of bravery can ripple outward, touching countless lives. The woman attended the unveiling ceremony, her heart swelling with pride as she watched families gather to celebrate the spirit of togetherness. Despite the progress, however, the woman knew healing wasn't linear. Some days were easier than others. There were mornings when she woke up feeling empowered, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Other days, the memories of the harassment crept back in, casting shadows over her thoughts. On those difficult days, she reached out to the Marines, knowing they would answer without judgment or hesitation. Sometimes it was just a quick text. "Hey, I'm having a tough day." Other times she called them, her voice trembling as she poured out her frustrations and fears. And every single time they responded with patience, humor, and unwavering support. "You're allowed to have bad days," one of them told her once, after she admitted feeling overwhelmed. "What matters is how you handle them. You don't have to do it alone, okay? We've got your back." Those simple words carried immense weight, reminding her that vulnerability wasn't a weakness. It was a strength. By leaning on others when she needed help, she was practicing the same values she admired in them: trust, humility, and resilience. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light across the lake, the group decided to take a walk together. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of autumn leaves. They strolled along the path, their footsteps synchronized despite their differing paces. The woman pushed her wheelchair slowly while the Marines walked beside her, their presence comforting and familiar. As they moved, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: funny memories from their time in service, quirky habits they'd picked up over the years, and dreams for the future. One of them joked about starting a food truck business specializing in military-themed dishes, earning bursts of laughter from the group. Another teased him mercilessly, pointing out that his cooking skills left much to be desired. The woman joined in, her giggles mingling with theirs, filling the air with warmth and joy. For a moment, it felt like nothing else existed outside their little bubble. No past traumas, no lingering fears, just the present, shared among friends who genuinely cared for one another. It was a rare kind of peace, one that reminded her how beautiful life could be when surrounded by good people. Eventually, they stopped near a bench overlooking the water. The woman gazed out at the shimmering surface, her expression thoughtful. After a long pause, she turned to the Marines, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You know," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I used to think I lost a part of myself when I got hurt, like I wasn't the same person anymore. But meeting you guys, it made me realize that maybe I didn't lose anything. Maybe I just found a new version of myself, one that's still strong, still capable, and still worth fighting for." Her words hung in the air, profound yet simple. The Marines nodded, their expressions soft but serious. None of them needed to respond verbally. They understood. In that moment, they weren't just veterans or survivors. They were human beings connected by shared struggles and triumphs. Together, they had created something special, a reminder that even in the darkest times, hope and friendship could light the way forward. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, the group lingered a little longer, savoring the quiet magic of the evening. Though none of them knew what the future held, they were certain of one thing: their bond would endure, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of the human spirit. The bond between the woman and the Marines wasn't just a fleeting connection, it became a cornerstone of their lives. Over time, they discovered that their shared experiences extended far beyond the incident at the park. Each of them carried scars, both visible and invisible, from their time in service. For the woman, it was her physical injuries and the lingering emotional toll of combat. For the Marines, it was the weight of memories they couldn't unsee and the struggle to find purpose after leaving the structured world of the military. Together, they found solace in sharing those burdens, creating a space where vulnerability wasn't weakness but strength. One crisp Saturday morning, as autumn painted the park in hues of amber and gold, the group decided to spend the day volunteering at a local community event. The event was organized by veterans advocacy groups, aiming to raise awareness about mental health challenges faced by former service members. Booths lined the park pathways, offering resources, workshops, and activities designed to bring people together. It was exactly the kind of gathering that resonated with all of them, a chance to give back, connect with others, and remind themselves why community mattered. The woman wheeled herself toward one of the booths, her face lighting up as she spotted familiar faces among the crowd. Many attendees recognized her from the viral post she had shared weeks earlier. Some approached her hesitantly, thanking her for speaking out and admitting they too had felt alone in their struggles. Others simply nodded in solidarity, their eyes conveying what words could not. She welcomed every interaction, feeling a renewed sense of purpose with each conversation. Meanwhile, the Marines took charge of setting up an obstacle course for kids, teaching them teamwork and discipline through fun challenges. Watching them interact with children was heartwarming. They bent down to explain rules patiently, cheered loudly when someone succeeded, and offered encouragement when someone stumbled. Their laughter echoed across the park, blending seamlessly with the chatter of families enjoying the festivities. It was clear that these men weren't just warriors. They were teachers, mentors, and friends. As the day wore on, the woman joined, the Marines at the obstacle course, cheering alongside parents and volunteers. One little boy, no older than 7, tugged at her sleeve shyly. "Are you a Marine too?" he asked, his wide eyes filled with curiosity. She smiled warmly, leaning closer so he wouldn't have to strain to hear her answer. "Not exactly," she replied gently, "but I served my country in other ways. And these guys here? They're some of the best people I know." The boy beamed, clearly impressed. He ran off to tackle the next challenge, shouting over his shoulder, "I'm going to be like you when I grow up." Her heart swelled at his enthusiasm, and she turned to the Marines, shaking her head with a grin. "You've got yourself a fan club," she teased, earning chuckles from the group. Later that afternoon, the organizers gathered everyone near the main stage for a panel discussion. The topic was simple, yet profound. How can we create a culture of kindness and support within our communities? The woman and the Marines were invited to speak, their story serving as a powerful example of how individual actions can inspire collective change. As they sat side by side under the bright lights, microphones in hand, the woman glanced at her companions, drawing strength from their presence. She spoke first, her voice steady despite the nerves fluttering in her chest. "When I posted about what happened to me, I didn't expect it to go viral," she admitted, looking out at the sea of faces before her. "But I realized something important. People want to believe in goodness. They want to hear stories that remind them that even in tough situations there are still heroes, ordinary people who choose to do the right thing." Her words earned murmurs of agreement from the audience. Encouraged, she continued, "What those Marines did for me wasn't extraordinary, it was human. They saw someone in need and stepped in without hesitation. That's the kind of behavior we should all strive for. We don't need capes or medals to make a difference. Sometimes, all it takes is showing up." When it was the Marines' turn to speak, they kept their remarks brief but impactful. One of them leaned into the microphone, his tone earnest. "We're not special because we wore uniforms," he said firmly. "We're special because we care. And caring isn't limited to veterans, it's something anyone can do. Whether it's helping a neighbor carry groceries or standing up for someone being treated unfairly, every action counts." The applause that followed was thunderous, rippling through the crowd like waves. People stood to cheer, their admiration evident in every clap and whistle. But for the woman and the Marines, the real reward wasn't the recognition. It was knowing they had planted seeds of hope and inspiration in the hearts of those listening. After the event, the group lingered in the park, reluctant to part ways. The sun was beginning its descent, casting long shadows across the grass. Families packed up coolers and blankets, while volunteers dismantled booths and folded chairs. The air buzzed with contentment, a testament to the day's success. As they strolled along the path, the woman noticed a young couple sitting on a bench nearby, their heads bowed in quiet conversation. Something about their body language caught her attention. They seemed troubled, weighed down by something heavy. Without saying a word, she maneuvered her wheelchair closer, giving them a warm smile. "Hey there," she greeted softly. "Is everything okay?" The couple looked up, startled by her approach. After a moment's hesitation, the man sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's been a rough week," he admitted. "My wife is a veteran, and she's been struggling lately. We came here hoping to find, I don't know, maybe some answers or support." The woman exchanged a glance with the Marines, who immediately stepped forward, offering reassurance. "You're in the right place," one of them said kindly. "There's no shame in asking for help. In fact, it's one of the bravest things you can do." For the next 20 minutes, the group stayed with the couple, sharing resources, exchanging stories, and reminding them they weren't alone. By the end of the conversation, the tension in the couple's shoulders had eased slightly, replaced by a glimmer of hope. As they parted ways, the woman handed them a card with contact information for local support groups and counseling services. "Take care of yourselves," she urged gently, "and remember, reaching out is the first step." Back at home that evening, the woman sat by her window, watching the stars twinkle to life in the night sky. Her phone buzzed repeatedly with messages from attendees thanking her for her speech and expressing gratitude for the Marines' wisdom. She read each one carefully, marveling at how a single act of courage could spark a chain reaction of positivity. As she scrolled through the notifications, her thoughts drifted back to the couple at the park. Helping them hadn't been part of the plan, but it reminded her of something important. Kindness doesn't follow a schedule. It shows up when it's needed most, often in unexpected ways. Whether it was stepping in during a crisis or simply lending an ear, every gesture mattered. She set her phone aside and picked up a pen, jotting down notes for a blog post she planned to write. The title came easily. "The Ripple Effect: How Small Acts of Kindness Can Change the World." Writing had always been therapeutic for her, and now, more than ever, she felt compelled to document her journey, not just for herself, but for anyone searching for light in the darkness. By the time she finished drafting the post, dawn was breaking outside her window, painting the horizon in shades of pink and orange. She hit publish with a satisfied sigh, knowing her words would reach people hungry for hope. As she sipped her morning coffee, she reflected on everything that had transpired since that fateful day at the park. Life hadn't magically become easier, but it had grown richer, with friendships, purpose, and a renewed belief in humanity's capacity for goodness. And though the road ahead would undoubtedly have its challenges, she faced it with confidence, knowing she wasn't walking it alone. The weeks that followed the community event felt like a turning point, not just for the woman and the Marines, but for everyone who had been touched by their story. The ripple effects of their actions continued to spread, reaching corners of the town they hadn't even imagined. People began organizing smaller gatherings inspired by the event, neighborhood potlucks, school assemblies focused on kindness, and even workplace discussions about supporting veterans and others in need. It was as if the entire community had woken up to the idea that small acts of compassion could add up to something much bigger. For the woman, life started taking on a new rhythm. She still visited the park regularly, finding comfort in its familiar sights and sounds. But now she wasn't just another face in the crowd. Strangers approached her with smiles, sharing how her story had encouraged them to reach out to someone struggling or stand up against injustice. Some told her they'd started volunteering at shelters or mentoring kids after hearing her speak. Others simply thanked her for reminding them that it's okay to ask for help when you need it. Each interaction filled her with a quiet sense of pride, knowing her experience had sparked positive change. One sunny afternoon, as she sat beneath the same oak tree where everything had unfolded, a young girl no older than 10 approached her, shyly. Clutching a handmade card decorated with glitter and stickers, the child held it out hesitantly. "This is for you," she said softly, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Curious, the woman accepted the card and opened it carefully. Inside, written in colorful markers, were the words, "Thank you for being brave. You're my hero." Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked at the girl, overwhelmed by the sincerity of the gesture. "That's so sweet," she managed to say, her voice thick with emotion. "Do you know what makes me really happy? That you think I'm brave. But guess what? You're brave too for coming over here and giving me this." The girl beamed, clearly thrilled by the compliment before skipping off to join her friends playing nearby. Watching her go, the woman couldn't help but smile. In that moment, she realized something profound. Bravery isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's as simple as a child mustering the courage to hand over a card, or a veteran stepping in to protect someone in need. These moments might seem small, but together, they create a tapestry of hope and resilience. Meanwhile, the Marines found themselves busier than ever. Their newfound visibility in the community opened doors they hadn't anticipated. Local schools invited them to lead workshops on leadership and teamwork, while businesses sought their advice on fostering camaraderie among employees. They became unofficial ambassadors of goodwill, using their platform to promote values like respect, accountability, and unity. Yet despite the increased attention, they remained grounded, never losing sight of why they'd stepped forward in the first place. One evening, as the group gathered at a diner downtown, one of the Marines raised his coffee mug in a toast. "To unexpected friendships," he said with a grin, his tone light-hearted but sincere, "and to proving that no matter how tough things get, we've always got each other's backs." Everyone laughed and clinked their glasses together, the warmth of camaraderie filling the air. For all of them, these regular meetups had become sacred, a chance to recharge, reflect, and remind themselves of the power of connection. Even the simplest conversations carried weight, offering reminders of why they kept showing up, not just for themselves, but for others. As the meal wound down, the topic shifted to future plans. One of the Marines mentioned an idea he'd been mulling over, starting a mentorship program specifically for veterans transitioning to civilian life. "Think about it," he said, leaning back in his chair. "So many of us struggle with finding our footing again. What if we created a space where vets could connect, share resources, and support each other?" The woman nodded enthusiastically, her eyes lighting up. "I love that," she said. "It's exactly what I needed when I first came home. And honestly, it's still what I need sometimes. We could make it happen." Encouraged by her enthusiasm, the group began brainstorming, ideas right there at the table. By the time dessert arrived, they had sketched out a rough plan: monthly meetings, guest speakers, skill-building workshops, and maybe even partnerships with local organizations. It wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth doing ever was. But they were determined to try. After all, they'd come this far together. Why stop now? Months later, the mentorship program officially launched, drawing participants from across the region. Veterans of all ages and backgrounds showed up, eager to connect and learn. Some sought guidance on navigating healthcare systems or finding employment. Others simply wanted a safe space to talk about their experiences without judgment. Whatever their reasons, they left each meeting feeling less alone and more hopeful. Watching the program grow, the woman reflected on how far she'd come since that harrowing day at the park. Back then, she'd felt powerless, reduced to a target of cruelty. Now she stood tall, not physically perhaps, but in spirit. She had reclaimed her voice, her dignity, and her faith in humanity. And she owed much of that transformation to the Marines who had refused to let her face adversity alone. One chilly winter evening, as snowflakes danced through the air, the group reunited at the park. They huddled near the lake, bundled in coats and scarves, sipping hot chocolate from thermoses. The trees were bare, their branches etched starkly against the gray sky, but the atmosphere was anything but somber. Laughter echoed around them as they reminisced about the past year, the struggles, the victories, and everything in between. "I never thought I'd say this," the woman admitted, her breath visible in the frosty air. "But I'm actually glad that day happened. Not because of what those bullies did, obviously, but because it brought us together. If it hadn't, I wouldn't have met any of you. Her words hung in the silence for a moment, resonating deeply with everyone present. Finally, one of the Marines broke the quiet with a chuckle. Funny how life works, huh? Just when you think you're at your lowest, something, or someone, shows up to remind you that you're stronger than you feel. They lingered there, for a while longer, watching the snow blanket the ground and transform the park into a winter wonderland. As they parted ways, promising to reconvene soon, the woman glanced back at the oak tree one last time. It stood tall and resilient, its branches reaching skyward despite the cold. To her, it symbolized everything she'd learned over the past months, that strength isn't about never falling. It's about rising every time you do, and sometimes, all it takes is a helping hand to lift you back up. With that thought, she wheeled herself toward home, her heart full and her spirit unshakable. Life would always have its challenges, but she faced them with confidence now, knowing she wasn't alone. Together, she and the Marines had turned darkness into light, and, in doing so, they had proven that kindness truly does conquer cruelty.